Without further ado, I am bringing you the background story, the origin story of how I became a barefoot walker and eventually a barefoot hiker. I do not even have a sterile recording environment. I'm going for this because I would like to share this right off the bat on this channel. However, I would caution you, remember that anecdotal evidence can really lead you astray. So don't try to over-apply my situation to yourself. I would especially ask that you not hold yourself to my timeline of transitioning. No matter what you feel, I would take everything into consideration that you can by looking into the resources that I mentioned during this video, because maybe what I needed from those resources is different than what you would most need to hear from those resources. So I do believe that I am pointing to the best resources for transitioning that I know of, but please do not think that your scenario is going to somehow parallel mine. There's no way that I could fully give you all the background information about myself that might be totally different from your background, that might change the way that your body responds and everything. Also, you have to take into account where you live and the terrain that's out there. For me, I'm in Utah, and that's where I transitioned, and that plays a big part. And even the valley that I'm in Utah has different terrain and different possibilities for being barefoot than other valleys. So think about all that and just make sure that you have the utmost respect for my individuality while you listen to this, and for your individuality, that your story is just gonna have to be totally different. There's no way also, finally, that I could fully explain why something happened spontaneously for me and why it might not for you, and you might expect it to. I enjoy looking into things and trying to form theories, but that does not mean that if I offer an explanation about myself, that doesn't mean that it's actually the right explanation. And so you need to take this all with a grain of salt. Now, I have tried to carefully think this through as best as I can, but I will mention I am learning new things from month to month all the time. That's going to be the rest of my life. I hope that you're the same way. So please just take this into consideration as part of your journey. I am assuming that if you're watching this, you're fairly, at least intellectually curious about transitioning yourself, which is why I gave you this entire disclaimer. Now, I intentionally waited till I was 3 years into being a barefoot walker to do this YouTube channel. I was going to start a blog about it a couple years ago, and I actually held my tongue because the practical wisdom that I had then was nothing compared to the practical wisdom that I have now after just a little bit more experience, seeing the seasons change a couple of times extra. All of these things add to your judgment. They kind of season you. It helps you kind of slow down from being a hothead and act with a little bit more prudence. So that's why I waited this long. But that being said, there will be a lot more experience in the future with different life circumstances and everything. So this, I can only speak to the life that I have led for the last 3 years, and it's probably going to change. I would totally imagine if you were to ask somebody what it's like to be a barefoot walker when you have kids, they'd probably tell you a lot of other things, so in my future, things are probably going to shift and change, okay? All right, now give me a minute to talk about what I brought to the transition, because you have to take it all into account. I was not an overly sedentary young child for US standards, I think probably in other countries there's a lot more movement just naturally from it's not like in America we squat to go to the bathroom or sleep on the floor or anything. So, for living in the United States, I grew up playing outside a lot when I was very little, but I do want to just mention that even though I was not wearing high-heeled shoes as a child, almost all shoes have a raised heel. So I brought this demonstration. So I brought a women's flat that has, it's fairly minimalist, but look, there's a heel on it. If you look, it's not a huge heel, but we really don't wear shoes that are actually flat. So I assume I grew up and my hips developed with shoes with slightly raised heels, and so I was trying to transition out of that. Now, I hadn't gotten so old by the time I transitioned that it had been decades and decades and decades, but because I was 22, you have to take into account that my entire walking life, I was probably wearing shoes with a slightly raised heel. I wasn't crazy about high heels for any long period of time, and that's pretty nice too, because I do find they tend to have more calf tension and things like that. People who wear a lot of high heels a lot of the time. Really quickly, let me finish this short outline. By the age of 12, I was a lot more sedentary and just wanted to sit on the couch and, use screens and everything. And then if you move on to age 14 all the way up to whatever, age 18, because that's where we're going to start out, I started to love exercise, but in the sense of I'm going to sit on the couch all day and then I'm going to go do 1 hour of exercise and then I'm going to go back to sitting on the couch. And so it's not like it was helping that much, but I did do, I'm like the typical, person from the United States, female, got into distance running, got into other forms of exercise. But yeah, I don't think that other than the exercise time, I was not doing a lot of movement. Now, when I was about 18 and a little bit before that, I started to realize that I felt a lot better when I was walking. So I did take more walks. And then by age 18 onward, just going to college and everything, you walk a lot just to get places and in between classes. So I was more of a walker by then. And I even would just walk therapeutically, like, oh, I'm in a very anxious state, I'm going to go take a walk. So I think that helped a little bit. But let's talk about the footwear that I was wearing. So now we're starting kind of the timeline of the origin story, because it all goes back to when I'm 18 and I have this on-campus job as a student. And I am walking a lot for it. And then all of a sudden I develop this pain. I think it was in my left foot. It felt like someone was stabbing a nail in my midfoot. So picture someone trying to like jam a metal object in between two of your metatarsals. That's what it felt like. The more that I would walk around, it felt like my foot was like curling up into a claw, like my foot was resisting. So of course I sought just medical care, and I go in and they're like, well, there's no swelling. There doesn't seem to be some sort of acute injury. They took an x-ray thinking, well, maybe it's the beginnings of a hairline fracture. No, it wasn't that. Well, maybe you have a bone spur. No, it wasn't that. And they thought, well, maybe your foot bones are articulating so poorly that something's just gone horribly wrong and we're going to have to correct it with foot surgery. And no, they wouldn't even determine that. They were just like, look, there's nothing wrong with your foot. You need to immobilize it till it feels better. So what I did was they gave me the foot brace where it's just across the bottom. It's like this big plank across the bottom and there's Velcro across the top. And I immobilize it. And everyone was like, did you have foot surgery? And I'm like, no, I had a foot ache. So I immobilize it for that, because that's just, what else do you do? There was no emergency thing that they could help me fix. And listen, I would love to have my hands in the life of an MD if I needed reconstructive spinal surgery after a car accident. They're so good at saving lives and they're really good at getting emergencies under control. But when it came to this sort of vague, nebulous, chronic problem, there just weren't any answers. So I immobilized, and then around the time that I was wearing that, someone was talking to me about foot problems, and they were like, oh, well, you should just work in really supportive shoes since you walk so much. Why don't you get a pair of Danskos? Now, I can't believe I still have these, because I would probably never put them on again, but here's the demonstration. Now note, first of all, that they're thick and rigid soles, but also you can even tell just from looking that there is quite a bit of a raised heel on these. Now you can tell if your footwear has a raised heel, because if you put your hands into the toe box and feel the thickness of the sole, and then you put your hands here in the heel, you can feel the difference in thickness. There's quite a bit of a raised heel on these, but they're very supportive. So supportive, in fact, that any time that I had a problem with foot pain after that, I would just strap these to my feet and keep on going. Through thick and thin, I was just strapping these to my feet because they are as rigid as the medical brace that I was given, and immobilization was the answer always. So I kept on doing my running and my walking for my job and my taking walks and everything in highly supportive shoes, if not these things, these big ugly things. And I went on that way for quite a while. That was my way of getting by, and it worked, just immobilizing. Luckily for me, I started to have other problems as a manifestation of just immobilizing as my cop-out. So thank goodness for that, because it initiated the process of discovery. Now, I take you to 2017, where the transition timeline begins. But the transition timeline begins in, let's call it October or November. And I just want to really quickly rewind. Starting in 2016 and then again in 2017, I was heavily into yoga. I got into the practice, and by this I just mean the athletic, going to the yoga class, like exercise class. And I even was learning principles that I would later bring into my transition. So much show and tell. I'm going to be in and out of the shot. So I did learn that wobbling is really good for your ankle. Well, I don't think I ever said it was good for my ankle at the time. So we're in like early 2017. I'm going to yoga all the time, but I'm going to yoga in my thick supportive shoes and then taking them off and then practicing yoga indoors and then putting the shoes back on. So you can see I'm not thinking outside the box at all, but I do think that it might have helped. Now, just to preempt a possible question you might have, I don't think that practicing yoga, even if you're really intensely into it and you do it like 5 or 6 times a week, I don't think that that will directly translate into helping you transition to barefoot, because when I was in my barefoot phase as a yoga teacher and going to yoga and everything, it's a very foreign concept to most people who do yoga. The two worlds are unfortunately pretty separate. So I just want to mention that there's no direct stuff, but you're going to be able to, if you're really into yoga, you'll be able to like pull certain ideas that you get during yoga and then realize what was really going on there. And that was very true for me. I do think that yoga is the form of formal exercise that is most likely to give you a bunch of principles that are helpful. It's just that merely practicing yoga on a mat on a flat hard ground doesn't necessarily prepare your feet for the outdoors. Okay, now I had learned that wobbling was good for you, quote unquote. I don't think I knew what. Now, maybe I don't even know why it's good now fully, but I do know that I have a lot stronger ankles, and maybe my ankles were getting strong ahead of time, and that directly goes up to your hip strength. Why? Because everything's connected. And this, I just want to show you this product because it is amazing and everyone should have one of these. If you own a yoga block, throw away your yoga block and get this. So I'll show you how it says right here, Unblock, UNBLOK. It's a Manduka product, but you can see how it's a regular yoga block on most of it, but it has this curved part. And it's also curved on this side as well. So you can rock on it this way with this curved part on bottom. And you could also rock on it with this curved part on bottom. So if you picture me standing on this with this curved part, I'm standing now on a yoga block that's like a rocking chair for my foot. And if I stand with my foot across it and do standing yoga balances, all of a sudden I'm getting a bunch of ankle mobility and strength, and I'm able to stabilize my body a lot better on an uneven surface. So I had incorporated that type of love of wobbling into my yoga practice long before I was into the actual barefoot phase. And I had learned that wobbling is really good for you and that having to stabilize is good for you in other things. Like I had a really sore knee and then I went to a paddleboarding yoga class only once, but they did it like, at my local rec center. They brought a bunch of paddleboards out to the wave pool and we were practicing yoga on the paddleboards. And all that wobbling and the need to stabilize fixed my knee. By the time the class was over, that sharp knee pain was gone. So I was learning all these general principles, but nothing that would have directly helped me. And now we get into the symptoms that led me to do more research. So, did I get into barefoot walking because I was raised as a flower child? The answer is no. I started to get some hip pain. So, I'm taking you back now to October or November, somewhere around there, 2017. I am making this video now at the end of May 2020. So that's roughly the timeline. I'm 22 years old. Back in 2017, I'm 22 years old, and I have this temp job because I had finished my undergraduate degree, and I was in this period before I went into the field that I'm in now, where I just wanted to fill the time, make some money. So I'm at a retail store, and we're unloading large pallets of merchandise and bringing them out onto the floor and positioning everything and cleaning everything up. And that's the kind of stuff I was doing. So a lot of needing to go down to the ground to pick stuff up that had fallen and move it somewhere else. So all of this picking stuff up off the floor was really getting to me in my back and in my hips. And I think it's because I was just like standing still with straight legs, and then I would just flop over with my spine and pick stuff up. And something about that was really hurting my hips. So because I was already into yoga, I go to my yoga teacher and I'm like, listen, I need some advice on like a functional thing. I really am hurting my hips as I pick stuff up off the ground. And here's what I do. And I showed her what I do. And she said, oh, well, you know what? You should be easier on your spine and your hips. Turn this into a squat down on the ground, so bend your knees fully, go all the way down squatting so your spine is still upright, pick stuff up that way. And then when you stand up, you're loading the bigger muscles that are meant to take it. So I was like, oh, that's good advice. Thanks. So I go to work and mind you, I'm doing these movements up and down, up and down, up and down from the floor all day long, whenever I'm working. So the squat helped my hips and my spine, but then it really started hurting my knees. And I didn't know, I knew what they tell you in yoga, but in yoga, you'll hear any old thing. They'll tell you to point your toes out away from each other. They'll tell you to have your feet, I don't know how often they actually tell you to have your feet parallel. I think mostly people are pointing their toes away from each other when they're doing squats in yoga. They never tell you where your knees should be. Most people's knees are wandering all over the place. There was no clarity on that. If a yoga teacher ever gave me good advice on that, it was like a one and done thing. And then I go to the next class and there's just no clarity. So that's kind of why you can't take this comprehensive understanding of human alignment from going to yoga classes, because also the pose might not be the most neutral, functional human pose in yoga. So even if they do actually come out with a stance on where your toes should be pointed in a squat, you don't know what sensation they're trying to bring out in you, or you don't know if they're just trained that that's the way the pose is, but there's no connection to the biology of the pose, to the way, what it does to your body. So anyway, that's for another playlist. So now I am doing the squats and it feels good everywhere except my knees. And I was like, okay, I need to be trained on squats. What's the form? Just tell me the form, because I have the exercise mentality. I'm just like, okay, just tell me the form for a squat so I can go do it at work. And I had looked up a podcast in the past from Katy Wells, and it's called Wellness Mama. And no, I don't have kids, but it was like something that had come up from something else. She had been interviewed by somebody else, and I was like, oh, her podcast was covering some cool topics. So it was in my feed, and I had remembered seeing an episode that had the word squat in it. So I go back and find it, and I think it was called Why to Stop Doing Kegels and Squat Instead. It's something like that. But I was like, surely the guest knows about squatting. So I click on that, and it's Katy Bowman is the guest. Woo! So this is the beginning of everything. So I listened to the podcast, and everything is resonating with me so strongly. So another quick pause in the timeline. Earlier that year and earlier before, I had gotten really deep into not being in the medical world, but being tangential to the medical world as a medical interpreter. So basically, all my time is spent shadowing doctors and being around all that culture. And I decided that to be a better medical interpreter, I should take coursework in anatomy, which I had done earlier that year, and I loved it. The day that I walked into the cadaver lab, I fell in love with the study of the human anatomy. For whatever reason, it was a spontaneous thing. I really loved it. And so I had been thinking a lot about how all of our parts fit together and all, the particular shape and function of each body part and how it all interlocks together into this incredible body. I was already thinking in those terms before. So now we're restarting the timeline. So now I'm listening to this episode and going, wow, because everything Katy Bowman says, I think 12 other things about I know you're keeping it simple for the audience, but if that's true, then by virtue of that, these 12 other things are true. If this is a benefit of that, then therefore it also helps this, and this in your body. So all these light bulbs are going off in my head, and I just love it. And I'm like, wow, this is changing my mindset, because Katy Bowman's more radical than anyone that I had listened to before. Then we get to the end of the episode, and all of a sudden Katy Wells says to Katy Bowman, well, everyone knows that you are the barefoot expert. And I'm like, I think I just thought nothing about it. And then she says, what footwear should people be wearing if they want to do the best squat that they can? And Katy Bowman said, look, hands down, number one thing is stop wearing shoes with a raised heel. And I am wearing these as I listen to the podcast at work, because I was immobilizing my feet so I wouldn't get foot pain from being on my feet all day, and very, very raised heel. And so that one was harder to swallow. My assumptions up to that point were that these shoes were what was helping me from getting foot pain. And so it was kind of hard for me to accept that I might be wrong about that. So it took a while, but it must not have taken that long for me to go, okay, this must be right. So still in 2017 at this temp job, I'm at a job where I can listen to podcasts all day long. because all the work is physical. So I binged Katy Bowman's podcast. It at the time was called Katy Says, and now it's called Move Your DNA with Katy Bowman. She changed the name of it. But all the episodes that existed at the time, I binged like all of them. And of course, light bulbs going off like crazy. And this somehow convinces me, okay, I'm going to switch to minimalist footwear. Now, that was the only thought at the time was, listen, if everything else Katy Bowman says makes so much sense, then she must be right about footwear. So I am going to drop all my previous assumptions about wearing these shoes and what's good for my feet and look into it. I couldn't afford all of the specialty made minimalist footwear. So I go to the thrift store and I found water shoes. Actually, they were the favorite minimalist shoes for the longest time. Water shoes from like Sand and Sun brand. The sole was broken into different segments because the shoe is like highly permeable by water and other stuff, and then it's mesh all around it, but it was super roomy. Totally, it was like a water shoe for my foot, so it just fit my foot like a sock, and there was this highly flexible rubber sole on the bottom that was broken into segments, so it was even more mobile. And I found other stuff too that was kind of minimalist, but at the end of the day, even if you find a shoe that's flat, the number one thing that I would find is that the shoe would still be a little too narrow for my taste, and the sole would still be pretty thick. Even like a centimeter thick, like that's very thick, or even half a centimeter thick, too thick still. So really the shoes that shined forth from the thrift store searches were the water shoes. So now we're heading into the winter of 2017, and I won't say that I instantly had this wonderful experience and all of a sudden I became a gazelle in the woods, free in nature. Not at all. Because when I started rethinking my gait pattern, the way that I stepped on my foot when I walked, everything about my lifestyle in general and how it was affecting the way that I walked, when you overthink that at first, which you kind of have to discover all the things that you were unconsciously doing. This is a process, walking around, the way that you stand, the way that you walk around, the way that you sit. These things are automatic for a reason, because if you analyze them too much, you will go insane. There's too much there to notice, and you need to be focusing on like the work you're doing and the people around you and all the other stuff. And so it really overloads you cognitively when you start to tune into all this stuff that you never noticed before. Now, a quick word of encouragement, it does end, because it's all pretty much automatic to me now. Now, I do think that I preach body awareness, obviously, in this channel, but it's something that I'll check in with and then go about my day, and then check in with and then go about my day. So I do check in several times a day, but it's not this constant process of questioning and discovery and confusion. And unfortunately, you kind of have to go through that in the beginning when you're trying to discover your movement patterns just a little bit. Now, if you want to take it all really slow, then you can make it pain-free, but I did not take it slow. And so I was questioning everything all at the same moment. It's kind of like the children of Israel in the Old Testament. I had been freed from the captivity of the old way, but like the children of Israel, I now found myself wandering in the desert. And that often happens when you make significant shifts in your overall personality and lifestyle. So I'm wandering in the desert, it's just open-ended how things should be. And that actually caused a lot of suffering at first. But I am of the mindset that if you go for the typical medical route for a problem such as pain, if there is no acute trauma, they're going to give you something that helps you in the moment. The symptom goes away, it gets suppressed, but then in the long run, it gets worse and you're not helping yourself. This is the opposite of that. The pain was something that I took up front to avoid it forevermore in the future. And I will say now, I still get pain depending on my stress level and what I've been doing, but I'm usually able to reverse engineer it and figure out exactly what I've been doing and stop doing it, and then the pain goes away. That's a valuable skill to have. Not only does it save me time and money, because I don't have to be passed around between doctors and be looking into all the solutions that they recommend, but it gave me kind of a new ownership over myself and my life. It's the kind of confidence boost that comes from something very real. It's this whole, I will be able to figure out like anything that goes wrong in the future, even though I'm not be able to predict all the things that are going to cause me foot pain and spine pain in the future. I can figure it out. And I know that from this whole process that I went through back in 2017. So going back, it was ugly at first. walking and yoga, things that I had found so relaxing and so helpful, and not just relaxing and helpful, but actually just made me stronger overall in my body, just because it's so much more functional, compared to before when I would just run 25 miles and not ever look into any other thing about that my body could do. So the walking and the yoga started to have like a paradoxical effect. So if you look up what a paradoxical reaction is to pain meds, for example, it's where you take a pain med and it actually hypersensitizes your pain reaction and makes you feel more pain to break through the medication. So opposite of the desired effect. That's what was happening to me doing stuff that used to be so relaxing. Walking and yoga became unbearably painful because I was carrying new tension in my body, not only from the hyper awareness and the overthinking and the questioning and trying to throw out all the old mindset and everything, but I was going through toughening up my feet and my hips and everything. Toughening up your feet and your hips has to happen simultaneously when you're transitioning to barefoot, because if your hips can do a lot of the work, then the impact on your feet goes way, way, way down. So I'm trying to toughen up everything. And I'm wearing these shoes all the time. I'm just insistent on wearing the water shoes everywhere, which is also idiotic on a social level to wear water shoes to work and everything. And I wanted to avoid the most high impact surfaces. So if I was going for a walk, I'd walk in the grass, and then I'd want to avoid that little patch of concrete. And so I was taking way too big of a stride, and my foot was actually striking way out in front of my hip. I didn't know it at the time. So I'd go for a walk being like, well, this is what I've always done to be well. And I'm going, and I can't breathe. I'm so tight in the front of my neck and in the front of my hips. And it's because of this thing where my foot was planting way too far in front of my hip joint instead of directly beneath it. Here's the thing, when you're on a journey like this, you never know where you're going to find the answer. You find as many resources that you have found to be helpful in the past, and you just keep sifting through information until you find the answer. I did not find the answer from Katy Bowman at the time, even though she was providing all the helpful information that I needed to transition to barefoot. At the end of the day, my individual circumstance was helped by, I was listening to Endurance Planet, the podcast about runners, and I believe his name is Brock on there, but he's someone who's well informed about functional movement rather than just the athletic world. And he was talking about how he watches people's running form to see if they are striking directly beneath their hip joint. So that's where I found it. So you just never know where you're going to find the answer. You have to find all the podcasts that you find enjoyable to listen to and just keep all that information coming, because there will be this one golden nugget of information that changes everything. And then you are able to take that and keep moving forward in your process of discovery. So again, take heart, because this is the suffering up front and the benefits forevermore after. Now, the yoga also, just from the hyper fixation on, is my alignment good? And the stress that I was carrying in daily life, I would go to yoga and halfway through the practice, I'd be so tense. It's not that I was tired, and it's not that I was feeling actual injury pain. I was so tense though, that I remember a certain day where I, halfway through the practice, I just laid down flat on the mat, and there were silent tears streaming down the side of my face like this. And I'm so glad that the yoga teacher didn't worry about it, because everyone needs something different. I still wanted to be there in that room and share the room with other people, but I was not in a good place. I was so tense. And anyway, living situation was harder and everything. So I got through this winter through probably the pleasure of learning about the barefoot thing intellectually. That's probably what got me through it, because I have always found it intellectually exciting to learn about the body. And especially at that time, after that summer of finding my great love of the study of human anatomy, I think that I must have gone through that first winter just through intellectual curiosity. And, you can feel positive emotion as long as you feel like you're moving towards a goal. And I believe my goal that winter was just to keep on gaining understanding as much as I could. And so I kept feeling that positive emotion. I was still moving towards something. I did make these little discoveries, like in the cold winter when your body just can't warm up, I would roll my feet out on a massage ball vigorously, and it would warm up my whole body. And I was like, wow, the foot is the gateway to all these things in your body. I had no idea. And it turns out, yes, your foot is this highly sensitive, highly innervated, highly connected part to the rest of your body. So I was making these discoveries in small ways, but I was mostly just following Katy Bowman's smaller recommendations, like these little corrective exercises that she teaches that I would just do at home. I was just continuously consuming Katy Bowman stuff and finding her blog posts and buying her books. And I consumed, of course, whole Body Barefoot in audiobook format at my job. I was rolling my feet out all the time. I was doing all these little things that she recommended. But then on my walks, I'd be just wearing the water shoes. And yes, it was idiotic because the water shoes not only would get wet anytime that I was walking on wet grass or anything like that, but also I was at a job where that was not dress code. So I did step on a thumbtack that then I was like complaining about it while I was pulling it out of my foot, and my boss walked by and said, "What happened to your big thick shoes? You're supposed to keep that type of shoe on at this job. Like, you're not allowed to just wear any old shoe. Like, there's going to be sharp objects everywhere." Now, I actually didn't heed that. I said, yeah, okay, I understand, because you're getting like the liability away from you, and of course this is a very small problem, and it, you know, I healed up right away from it, so I was not worried about that. But I actually didn't heed her advice and start wearing the other shoes again, because I was almost done with the job anyway. But this is the beginning of probably a year-long period of this sort of being socially out of it, and it probably like hurt my social interactions for about a year because I was so gung-ho about it. Now, you don't have to be, but I would wear shoes that were highly inappropriate for the occasion just because they were the only minimalist shoes that I could find or afford. And I had like massage ball. There was this room where I was packing up stuff to be shipped for the job, and I had like massage balls rolling around on the floor everywhere that I was using, you know, and I'm in heaven, but then people walk in and trip over the massage balls. Like, idiotic. So if you're going to do the transition and get so excited about it, you know, just be aware that at first for me, I think I could have handled it better socially. So let's get into all of that in 2018 as well. So now the winter is ending, and my life started to come together in other ways, which I think helped all that tension in my body to subside. Because no matter how much you study human alignment, if your whole life is not in alignment, you know, emotionally and with your work situation and everything, it's hard to not have that constant chronic tension. So things were really coming together. I got a way into my dream field to work in, and so much was lining up. I don't think that I would have made so many leaps in 2018 if it hadn't been for life just lining up. Because if you're in a protective state where you're just stressed all the time, you're more sensitive on your feet. Like, on my worst days when I'm really like self-conscious and socially anxious and frustrated about other stuff in life, my feet are literally oversensitized to the ground. And so when I feel like rocks pushing into my feet when I'm barefoot, it is more painful, you know? So I think the emotional state calmed down and became more positive, and that really facilitated the next steps. So if I had needed to just do the minimal footwear and the study at home for longer, I totally would have. And I do think that the number one mistake people make when they're transitioning to the steps that I'm going to talk about from 2018, the biggest mistake that they make is they think that they can read a couple of blog posts and then they're ready. So in reality, you have to make a study of it. You have to make this into a big study of yourself and of information about the human body that you didn't know before, because you are trying to change a fundamental thing about the way that your body has been functioning your whole life, and you're trying to shift it. So I would definitely say people who, like the lady who sued Vibram for how the 5 fingers didn't give her her desired health benefits, it's because it doesn't all just come from taking your shoes off. I wish it were that simple and that it were just reflexive, but you have to take into account so many things. You have to get a better understanding of your body. Then you have to look into each aspect of your lifestyle and how it's affecting your functional mobility and everything. I had to look into my sleep position. I had to look into the position I sat in while I was driving. I had to look into the position that I worked in. All these things, because they all will create what you bring to the transition. So to quote Katy Bowman, who, even though she had like this incredibly comprehensive body of work that I would say is the number one thing that you should absolutely look into, her podcast, she sells videos that take you through corrective exercises, she's written many books. You have to look into all of it, really, to be honest. To quote her, though, she talks about how, number one, you are how you move. And then to expand and explain what that means, she talks about how I don't want to hear whether you're in shape or out of shape, because you're just in the shape of what you do all the time. So people who are in shape because they can do certain things at the gym and accomplish certain tasks physically, but then they spend the rest of the time on that couch time is forming their longitudinal spinal ligaments, which is going to impact their gait pattern when they're walking. You know, your forward head posture when you're driving and your hyperkyphosis when you're driving impacts your blood pressure and your organ health and your hip health, obviously, and all of the twisting in your pelvis while you're advancing that foot to push on the gas pedal when you're driving puts all these twists in your spine and your pelvis. And it's not that you can't go about your life and do all the things that you need to do, but the consciousness of each one of those and trying to set all those right is what it takes to be a comfortable barefoot walker. Because if you're going to walk the natural way, you're going to have to think about all the things that you have conditioned your body to do. So that was part of the pain, was coming to terms with all of that, because I had never, in high school and college and everything, I'd never questioned that we sit all day, and it's not, sitting is not always the culprit. You know, standing is putting some strain on me now at my standing workstation. It's just this whole lack of variety and the way that we sit with our spines all rounded forward and our head resting forward and our pelvis just kind of caught in the middle of this bad alignment, and it really doesn't help our hip function. And if you don't have hip and spine health, it's really hard to barefoot walk. Now that I have sufficiently scared you, in 2018, I went from enjoying minimalist shoes probably to an inappropriate degree. I would wear really ugly, really cheap minimalist shoes to inappropriate settings. Like professionally, you shouldn't just be wearing these like minimalist sandals that you found, or, you know, that look like they were just made out of an old tire. And I was doing it. And then I reached a point in, who knows, May, June, so now we're talking like exactly 2 years ago, that my routine habitual walk to the yoga class that I would take, and the walk was becoming kind of the main point, where if I missed the class, if I were late to the class, I wouldn't care, all the, you know, because the walk was the main point. So on my habitual walk to a yoga class that was 2 or 3 miles away, one day I just decided I want to not wear shoes. It occurred to me, it felt spontaneous, you know, just, wow, today I don't want to wear shoes. The weather, of course, was all balmy and beautiful, and I left the shoes at home, and it was so pleasurable, and it was so great. The hot asphalt from the summer sun was just somehow this highly invigorating experience, and the cool grass, and so I really liked it. And then I started doing a lot more walking through town, totally unshod. Now, whether that was fully a good idea is up for debate, and I'll talk about that in the developments later, but at the time I was just, anytime that I'd walk through town over mostly people's grass and there's xeriscaping with all the big boulders and then the unavoidable stretches of sidewalk and road, I would do all that with no shoes on for a while, and it couldn't have been so long before then we took a family trip to Colorado with my husband's family, and we did a hike called Hanging Lake. I got there with my shoes on, and then I decided I would like to take my shoes off and just see what this is like, because it seemed like really mild. And it turns out, coming from the perspective of someone who was doing a lot of barefoot walking like through town, the number of hazards on a trail in the Rocky Mountains is actually way less. There's so much less that I had to look out for. It was soft dirt, like dirt as fine and soft as cocoa powder, just delicious to walk across, and then big smooth stones. So it was a very pleasurable hike on my feet. Everyone was like, whoa, and that was the beginning of what I would consider to be the biggest pain in the butt to barefoot hiking, which is like deciding how to react to people's reactions. And so that started immediately that day. It must have been June or July 2018. And then we get all the way up, and I'm just like, wow, that was nothing. That felt really good. And forevermore, I have never taken a hike where I just put on shoes and keep shoes on the whole time. I have taken hikes where I brought shoes just in case. And it's really smart, because number one, you might come across a place that is simply too full of thorny plants or any other thing, or maybe a group was up there and shattered a bunch of beer bottles. Like, you never know. So then at this point I had invested in a couple more like quote unquote nicer barefoot shoes, and these are the Vivo Barefoot women's. And I learned that the women's for me actually were not, if I take a Vivo Barefoot women's, it's not a minimalist shoe for my foot. And the reason why is because I already had naturally wide feet, and then they got slightly wider from the barefoot walking. These are actually not very pleasant to wear for the long term. So I'll wear them to stuff if it's you just want a nice sleek looking sneaker type shoe. But I went on the Lone Peak hike with a group of friends in 2018, and we made it up, and then as we were going down, it got darker and darker. So I put these on to avoid the, once it gets dark, you can't look out for the thorny plants. You can't see exactly which rocks you're stepping on. And it is this entire task of being able to see the ground. So the number one time that bad things happen when you're barefoot walking or hiking is if it's dark. So I put these on. And man, by the end of that hike, I had made it up a fairly long trail barefoot, and my feet felt wonderful. People were asking, oh, like, how bad are your feet hurting now? I think we associate walking for a long distance with foot pain because of our shoes, because my feet felt wonderful. And then as we're hiking down and I have these on, by the end, my feet are killing me from the shoes, and it was the narrowness of them. So if your feet do not feel great at the end of a hike wearing certain minimalist shoes, then they're not minimalist for you. So you need to get the barefoot experience for a while and then test out shoes. And if by the end of that hike your feet are killing you, it's probably the shoes, especially if you've already experienced barefoot in the first place. And I have finally found shoes that really leave my feet alone, and I can end that hike feeling almost like I was barefoot. And a quick clarification, because I said I never hike bringing shoes. There is this certain point in the late fall where it gets so frosty that your feet are just no longer very pliable, and it's actually better judgment to cover your feet with something just to maintain the temperature that you need to have nice, workable, pliable feet. So there's the answer to that. We have not gotten to that point yet in the timeline, but I will really quickly. I'm going to have other videos that are just thematic and they're just about certain topics. So one of them would be like certain products that you should probably have on hand if you're a barefoot walker, if you're anything like me. And another one would be about all the injuries I've gotten and why and what I learned from them, because I'm not going to include all that. But I really quickly want to plug this, that on that Lone Peak hike, it really grinds your skin up. Now, it didn't rip into my skin, but it really toughened my feet up. And this stuff, and I'm going to talk about this particular pinion salve. I'm going to talk about this if you want to know where to get it. I'm going to talk about it in the video just about barefoot walking products that I would buy. But this stuff, that night we came back really late. My feet were killing me from the period that I spent with shoes on, but my calluses were a little bit toughened up, like a little bit ripped up. Not lacerated, but just kind of roughed up. And I put this stuff on my feet. I took a bath and put this stuff on my feet, and I felt my skin on my feet totally warm up with all the new blood flow that was going there, and the skin was already like healing itself. I wake up the next day, my feet are as good as new. I do not think that would be true if I didn't have this on, because also I have had periods where I ran out of it and I tried any other stuff just to maintain my calluses in normal conditions, not hiking on super rough terrain. And my feet just crack up into a million pieces until I finally buy this. I do think the key is if you buy pinion salve, the beeswax, it looks like a really good natural ingredient, but it's in there as a preservative. And I have just tried so many different pinion salves because pinion is the best. And when it has beeswax in it, it does not actually heal up your skin and your feet for some reason. At least for me, that's true. The only pinion salve I have found that is super helpful only has pinion salve, and this has coconut oil and vitamin E, nothing else. And I did one time find a pinion salve that just had sheep tallow in it, but if there is, and it worked, but if there's beeswax, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Okay, skating on by through just the narrative thread of the transition, by the end of 2018, as the winter came on, I would say that first winter was all about finding the limit, finding my edge. I had to find my threshold because people's threshold for cold tends to be way weaker than we're actually capable of. But there is actually a limit to the point where your body will stop functioning, and you'll get frostbite. So somewhere in between there, somewhere between the average person's definition of cold and the cold that will really do you in. And I had to find it. So that winter was full of a bunch of imprudence, and I really insisted on always walking barefoot outside unless there was a fresh snowstorm. Now, the last few winters in Utah have been fairly mild, so it wasn't a big deal. But if there was fresh snow, then the temperatures were such that I would need to cover my feet up. Now, I was very miserable that winter. I have these authentic, not cleaned up men's Vivo barefoots that I found. I found these on a clearance shelf, which is why I bought them, but they're men's, so they're a lot wider and a lot roomier and a lot more comfortable. So I'd wear these with big long socks, and my feet would still get soaking wet, obviously, in the snow if I ever had to cover my feet because of the snow. So then I could like walk somewhere, but then by the time I walked back, my ankles would be bright red because I couldn't keep my feet dry. I hadn't learned that key yet to keep your feet dry in the snow. When it was not actively snowing, usually the sun would come out and melt, at least that winter. It would melt so that the edges of the grass were visible, and the main part of trails would just be really muddy instead of snowy. And I was walking barefoot through all of that. The social implications of that were really annoying, to get the comments from people. And, sometimes they were justified. Sometimes I pushed it too far. But sometimes it really, with the sun coming and just beating down on stuff, that strong winter sun, it was more than tolerable. But anyway, sometimes there were days that I would really just walk barefoot through like slush and ice, and I would feel that I had reached kind of the edge where if I had done that for like another mile, I would have probably, my feet would have felt really bad. I don't think I ever would have gotten frostbite or anything like that because, like I said, if the temperature dropped below a certain point, I would cover up. But I couldn't for the life of me keep my feet dry. So it was a little nuts. I wanted to mention that as the negatives of the end of 2018, but the positives for 2018 about things that I discovered were, number one, I was able to rethink my workstation. And like I said, life circumstances facilitated that a lot. And sometimes you just have to wait for the right opportunity. But I would say another word of encouragement, if you're looking into all these life hacks and things you can do for your health, and you can invest in a standing workstation, you can invest in this product and that product, and if it just weighs you down and stresses you out because you can't afford it, I'm in that place all the time when I consume like health podcasts and things like that. I'm like, well, I can't afford that. But here's the thing. If you learn the general principle of that the person's sharing about why it changed their life and everything, one day you will be able to spring at some random opportunity that comes up. And if you're not aware that there is a certain health practice you would like to one day incorporate, then you're never going to spring for that opportunity when it comes. And so still listen to it. Don't stress that you can't buy products right away or ever. But if you just learn the concept, the opportunity one day will become, it'll get closer to you, and it's a lot easier for you to do it. So when you're listening to stuff like this, it's just a matter of being aware. And then one day something might open itself up to you. So at my standing station, this demonstration, I brought like big rocks in that I could kind of stand on, and I would balance on them and push my feet into them, and it gives you a nice foot massage. And if I need to stand still, this is an acupressure mat from Spunk brand, and if I'm standing still like I am right now, if you don't want to look like, whoa, while you're on like a Zoom call, I just stand still on the Spunk acupressure mat. It starts out feeling really pokey, but if you've been barefoot hiking for a few years, you barely feel it, but it just gives you something. Your feet want texture. So when I'm standing still and working, I'm always standing on the Spunk acupressure mat. And the last positive thing that I learned in 2018 was, it's a little woo-woo, but I'm going to share it. When you look into things like the chakra system, let's just talk about the 7 chakra system that you learn that kind of interlocks with yoga and Ayurveda and everything. First of all, if you actually look into it with curiosity, I think it has a lot of explanatory power, at least in my life. And for anyone who's like, no, there's no connection there, or no, you might think that symptom is connected to that emotional problem, but it's because it's psychosomatic. If I am so capable of giving myself psychosomatic problems like foot pain, that was partially psychosomatic when I was 18, if I'm capable of giving myself back pain because I'm stressed, if I'm capable of giving myself, shoulder and neck pain and just holding on to it and clinging to it because of a certain emotion that I'm feeling, if that's all psychosomatic, and then if I tell you this healing thing and you say, okay, but that's all just psychosomatic and made up, I'll say, okay, but so many of my problems are psychosomatic and made up that if I can harness my ability to do things to my body psychosomatically and reverse it for healing just with mindset and just with lifestyle, I'm all for it. Because I have psychosomatically done so much to my body and given myself so much pain. So I know that my mind has an incredible power over my body and how much pain I feel and whether I'm sick or healthy and all these things. So, just think of an example in your life when you literally made yourself sick, or you gave yourself, you're limping around and there's nothing wrong. You didn't break a bone, but you have given yourself a symptom. It's this manifestation of this deeper psychological thing going on inside of you. If you're able to give yourself pain, then you are also able to heal yourself outside of the medical world. I know that this is true, and so I will share this. If you look into all the things associated with the root chakra, I saw all those things kind of knitting themselves up and healing up in my life, like your sense of belonging, just basic survival, to get food and shelter, and to have a stable income and things like that. All of those mindsets started to kind of heal up in my life around the same time that I was going fully barefoot and barefoot hiking and everything. But also, it is the root chakra goes from your pelvic floor and your hips down to the soles of your feet. And I just have to say, barefoot walking healed my hips and my pelvic floor because it's all connected. And this makes a lot of sense because it's all connected in your nervous system as well. If you look at your sacral nerve plexus, it will innervate from your pelvic floor and your hips all the way down to your feet. It's all the same nerve plexus. It's so interconnected. And then you can talk about how that's all connected to your emotions and everything, but that's not my main point. Your root chakra is the lowest down. So if you believe in the explanatory power of the chakra system, each chakra is going to feed on the one beneath it. So if there's something off in the root, then everything else is going to be slightly off because everything feeds on the one beneath it. So if you fix things at the lowest level, which is the root, the healing will spread upwards. This is so true. So if you look into grounding, which that's pretty scientifically understood, that the voltage of your body can start to mimic the voltage of nature. If you come into contact with like natural source of water, if you walk barefoot on a natural surface like a mountain trail, that grounding, all of these things came together to sort of heal other aspects of my life that I didn't expect. And the biggest thing that I noticed in 2018, with all the grounding I was doing by walking barefoot in the mountains, fully barefoot, because the grounding matters, and most shoes have a rubber sole and they'll take the grounding away. All of that grounding and the energy transfer between me and the earth taught me how to relax in a way that I never had before. I've always been a high stress person. It started happening and it never stopped. There are times where I can just slow down and actually like let go and transfer my emotion away from me, like into the floor and away. I will also say that part of my daily life is that from all the barefoot hiking, probably just because it correlates with the same time frame, but maybe it's from something else, I feel my emotions more spread out in my body. So when I'm really stressed or surprised or worried, it would only go, to my trunk and make my guts rumble and make me have a headache, and it's all in your head. It makes your head all fuzzy and it gets in the way of your thinking. Somehow my emotions are experienced like more spread out throughout my body. Like the initial emotional reaction that I will have if I'm surprised, like let's say if something I don't want to happen happens all of a sudden and I have to deal with it, I will feel this firing of my calves. So I don't feel the emotion in my trunk or in my gut or in my chest or in my head. My calf muscles will fire as the gut reaction instead of anything else. I'll feel it that far away from my head. And then I'll be able to just relax my calves. If there's no running away that I need to do, I can just release my calves. Or sometimes like I'll feel my feet heat up and get like ready to run when I am upset. And then if there's no need to run, then I can release it because I know where it is. So it's just kind of changed the way that I emotionally experience life. Let's finish up talking about this year because my voice is getting tired. Last winter, I invested in a pair of mucklucks. I found the Manitoba mucklucks to be the most favorable because if you notice on the sole, they don't feel the need to just narrow in right around where your arch is. It just gives you total space and freedom in the sole of it, and it's an attractive boot. People compliment me on it, which learning to have minimalist footwear that isn't super offensive to the eye has been a long journey. And these I got the waterproof versions, and they are sheepskin on the inside, so they keep my feet warm and dry in those coldest winter situations. And it led to more winter hiking because I had those, so I could trek up in the snow when it reaches a certain point, when the temperature drops a certain amount, keeping your feet warm and dry, especially dry when it's snowy. And the snow is almost a bigger deal, getting your feet wet. If you keep them dry, then your feet can still be pliable and functional. And so it's actually more important. I don't think I had fully learned that trade-off. So if you look at the winter between 2018 and 2019, my biggest priority was just seeing how tough I could be. And then if you look at the winter between 2019 and 2020, it was learning at which point I should put on the mucklucks because it would give me a longer hike and a more functional foot in those weather conditions. So I have kind of matured in that way. I don't insist on barefootness all the time. So I'm going to only say two other things. Number one is related to that. So I don't always insist on being barefoot. If you see me in town, you might see me in a minimalist shoe. And that's because I've just not been able to deny that all that perfect manicured grass is constantly being sprayed with pesticides and herbicides and heaven knows what else. And that, when it absorbs straight into your skin, it's going straight into your bloodstream. I'm not going to go into all the product stuff and all the what each shoe does, because I'm going to just do that in the video that I make about products. But I will also say that I learned this year, even in the warmer times, and last year, even in the warmer times, I just learned that I found these, you can't really see on the camera, but they are just very basic. It almost looks just like ballerina flats with a strap across the top. And I ripped out the foam insoles so that I could make the sole even thinner. And it's nice and level and even because it's just a rubber sole with some synthetic fabric across the top. I don't love all the synthetic materials, but for the cheapness that I got these on Amazon, sometimes I'll go for a walk and I'll wear the shoes like this on my forearm. And this accomplishes two things. Number one is if I enter into a region where I'm like, oh yeah, this entire field that I want to walk across has been sprayed with pesticides, or if I want to go into a store and get something and I want to like meet the store policy and not come in barefoot, then I have these for those temporary moments. But they also are just so easy and portable to carry. These shoes also can fold up really well if I need to go teach on campus and I need to just fold up some shoes and throw them in my backpack and take a nice relaxing short barefoot walk to campus and then throw something on my feet before I teach. These things, and they're not so weird looking. They're not water shoes. They're not open-toed sandals. So I will deem them acceptable until I invest in nicer looking ones. But they're very portable. And then finally, the last benefit that they have is when people can see that I have these, if people can see that I'm basically like carrying shoes on my person and it's so visible, wearing my shoes on my sleeve, people don't worry so much about me. So people worry, especially when the weather is changing. But even in general, people are like, are you okay? Are you fleeing from trouble? Are your feet okay? People, they're just worried because they see something unexpected. And I used to get really sick of all those questions and just say the same thing every time. I'm like, nope, you're going to see me today, tomorrow, the next day, the next day, the next day, and I will never be wearing shoes. And so, nope, I'm fine. I'm not fleeing trouble. I didn't run out of my apartment in a hurry because I was being robbed and assaulted. Like, nope, I'm okay. Now, this signals to them that it's a choice to take my shoes off because they're like, oh, she must have just taken them off for a second. She's holding them. So it gives people a lot more peace of mind around me. And to be honest, it gives me a little bit more peace of mind because number one is that I'm signaling to people that it's a voluntary thing. And number two is that I can put them on if I reach an area that's just not so healthy for my feet or if I want to go into some sort of store or anything else. But the portability helps you to have more barefoot experiences and then be able to quickly put the shoes back on. Because otherwise, if I was walking to campus to teach, I would just have to put the shoes on or make a bunch of space in my bag for them. And if I don't want to make space in my bag, I just throw in these and they fold up really easily. Okay, so that was all encompassed in the first thing. The very last thing that I was going to say is that this has just changed the way that I think and process information. Being in grad school, people tell me that they will open up a PDF that we need to read for class. And because there's like 10 PDFs we have to read before the next class, they'll just kind of skim and just find a couple paragraphs to bite into, and then they're just kind of done, even though they didn't get the whole thing. And then they'll move on to the next one. So they have this really like incomplete, spotty understanding of everything. And I totally understand why they would do that because it's a pain to like visually read through things with your eyes on a screen, and you need to just get up and get moving and move about your day. It's like after a long day of classes and teaching, the last thing that you want to do is sit on the computer more. So I get it. But then they'll come to class and you can tell that they have this really incomplete understanding of everything. I would download PDFs for grad school onto Speechify. It's this app called Speechify, and go outside in the wilderness. And if you're a purist, it is possible to download the PDFs to Speechify and then change your phone to airplane mode and alternate headphones so that you're not always blocking your hearing. If you're a purist, there are ways to do this. And I would just go on a long barefoot hike and listen to all 10 PDFs and get this broad sweeping view, like a flyover view of the information that we're going to go over in class. And it somehow connects to me better because not only is my body, your cognition depends on your physical health. So not only is my body in, kind of like a much better place as I'm barefoot hiking in the mountains and everything, which really helps clarity of mind. But I also feel like someone's reading the paper to me. It's a robot, but I feel like someone's reading the paper to me, and that creates more of a memory. And then I will come home and look through the papers again really quick, and especially if there's any graphics or charts or anything that I need to review, then I would kind of polish up my understanding of the papers visually, but it takes a lot shorter because I do have this extensive understanding. You know how you can understand the extent of the paper first, and then you can go into the details afterward to make sure you're all good. And I would go to class and feel like I had more clarity than the people who were trying so hard, even the most dedicated people who were trying so hard to read the PDFs visually, just so bogged down. So even the hardest workers, the Hermione Grangers, I felt were more frustrated and had more of a choppy understanding than me from doing it this totally different way. So prioritizing walking and barefoot walking can really change the way that you process information. And as your lifestyle shifts, you're not ultimately making all these big sacrifices. I think that this enhances how I do in grad school rather than takes away. Now, sure, there's other stuff that takes away from it. I'm not saying that I'm handling it perfectly, but when it comes to the way that I process information, when people are trying to teach you something, I think this helps me do my study on my own time in a much more effective way. So I will mention, look it up. Charles Dickens walked an average of 13 miles a day. The creativity flows, the clarity of mind flows when you're walking. And, whether or not you like Theodore Roosevelt's politics and everything, he was a very strong personality and, like lucid and stuff. And he was known to take his constitutionals on a daily basis, get up in the morning and take a walk. So this does tie into your cognitive ability and your clarity of mind. And so I've just found that holding on to it, especially in all these, the crazy times of grad school and everything, it does nothing but help. And it just really enriches my life in things that would have been overwhelming are all of a sudden so manageable, because if I have hours of papers to consume and I can consume it out in the mountains and everything, it's great. And it makes me so much more refreshed and happy when I come to class, and yet I have this wonderful understanding of all the content. So there's just like no downside sometimes. All right, so you can see that the night is closing in and I've been talking, but I hope that you enjoyed this origin story. So it did come down to, I got into the barefoot stuff mostly just to manage joint pain in a more natural way, and now it's kind of just become part of my lifestyle and my personality. And when you're on a barefoot walk or a barefoot hike, time slows down. You experience life totally differently. So there you go. That's the honest truth. I'm sure there's a whole lot more that I could include, but if you are interested in a particular topic, you can comment with questions and everything, and I can answer just particular questions. Thank you.